Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. Hope you got
our snacks, our drinks,
your snack of choice,
stretch breaks.
whatever that may be.
Yes.
Yes.
All good stuff.
Oh, my thing is not right. There it goes.
Aha! Thought that looked
I was only like half set it up.
Oh, you refused, Johnum? Well, I don't know what to do about that, so I'll just say how dare you.
I'm just gonna feel sad.
I'm just gonna feel sad, I guess.
I'm just gonna feel sad.
Sadly sip my delicious warm milk.
Oh, warm milk. I ate too much candy.
I wanted to make hot chocolate, but I definitely did not have enough time to do so.
Lies. 10 minutes is enough time.
They were not lies.
Araya! I don't know why I said Araya when I did it.
Wait,
Aria! No. Aria!
Even I knew
Thank
that
you
was
for the
wrong
follow.
while you were saying
I
it,
literally
Ori.
just said it and was like, I know that this is wrong, but I'm already halfway through saying it. So...
Ori, I'm no better. I monkey see, monkey
You did.
do
You really
that.
did, didn't you? You really did.
I really did. Welcome,
welcome, Aria.
So good to see you.
Glad
and
to see
on
you
your
on
own
your account. Thank you for the follow.
Thank you for the follow. Jinx.
I hope something came up. I don't know if it did or not.
Oh no, I saw it. It was in the
okay.
corner.
It did. Okay.
Yeah, it did pop up on the side.
I'm just like so blind to it, I
head.
guess, that I'm just like without the sound, right? Because I specifically made them not have sounds because I didn't want them to have like sounds for like the other stream.
You just didn't want to be too obnoxious.
Yeah, I just wanted them to happen, but it means
Like,
I don't notice them at all.
They're there
Apparently,
for your viewing pleasure.
Guys, you know, it's interesting. I'm curious how all of you feel. We are getting close on YouTube to eclipsing the amount of followers on Twitch.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, we have 133 followers on YouTube, and we have 146 followers on Twitch. And that's from starting YouTube when we had about just over 100 followers on Twitch. So like,
over 100.
it's been creeping up real fast. It really does seem that way, doesn't it, Extreme Bulk Guy? It really does. But I'm impressed about what we're doing with it and how it's been going.
I am so happy with the growth, so happy with this community we've created.
I'm definitely happy, Extreme Bulk Guy, that we can be on both, right? You know, Mars and I made that decision. We didn't want to just abandon Twitch, you know? So.
Oh, we put a lot of work into this.
I'm glad. Oh, Mars, really quickly. When you're in chat, I want to make sure you can see the mod view correctly.
I believe I can. What is that? The cogwheel? No.
Yeah. So if you're in there, do you have a little sword?
I do have a sword.
Click the sword.
That is the mod view.
Okay. Then after you click the sword, next to chat. Hello, David Person. David Person. Are you just David? Are you just a person, or are you David Person? Welcome. Welcome to Viewing Our Thing. We're talking today about comic-related things, and specifically Mars today, the writer of our comic, will be talking about consistency in writing.
Yes. And
right.
Oh, what a broad topic that is.
Very. David Person, are you Dorky David Guy? Are you the same David Person, or are you a different David Person? I'm curious.
I was about to say, I only know one David.
Yes. Well, welcome either way.
Having another.
Yes, it is Dorky David Person.
Yes. Hey, Dorky David.
Hello, Dorky David. Thanks for watching on YouTube. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
We definitely appreciate it over there.
Every view over there helps. So
Indeed.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty. So. Yes, it is Extreme Bulk Guy. I still appreciate it, and I appreciate it watching on YouTube. Very important. Alrighty.
It's always appreciated.
So, yeah, while Mars is talking about that, I will be coloring the remastery of Entry 3, as you can see. I've been hard at work on the coloring aspect of all this. So, I don't know.
Oh, good.
Vix, if you're still here, these are the sneak peeks also. Yeah, I agree. Johnum. I know Dylan would also agree. Alrighty.
Oh, very much so.
So, with that, Mars.
Yes. Hey,
Yes,
Vic.
spiders. Spiders
Glad you
indeed.
could come for Comic Corner.
Do we want to go over the characters again? I like when people new come and we talk about
we
it.
do have some new people here.
We do have
So
some
let's
different
get them
people here.
acquainted with our boys.
Let us view beautiful comic boys, because I like to show them off, you know? Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
So anytime we have some new people in chat, we do like to catch them up to speed with what we're working on here, that being the characters. But don't worry, we don't do that every week, so it won't be too repetitive.
100%, David, 100%. Oh, well, good, Vix. You will hopefully appreciate all our beautiful comic boys. Mars, do we want to start backwards or forwards?
Define. Backwards or forwards?
Backwards would be main characters last.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, let's go backwards. Let's mix it up a bit.
All right. So, this is Aster. Aster's a caller, which means he's like an animal person. Whoops.
Yes. So in this world, there are such people called Exalium, which are half human, half animal hybrids that have evolved over the generations. And it does lead to some
shenaniganery.
Shenaniganery, sure. Let's go with that. Regarding their society and everything. But here's one of our beautiful boys.
Yep.
Like Ori said, Aster.
Yep. So he is based after the black-browed albatross.
Yes.
Then we have another beautiful boy, Sinnet. Such a cutie.
He is adorable. Honestly, one of my favorites. I love writing for him so much.
He's a very soft
Such an
boy.
innocent bean.
He is based off a bamboo or walking shark. They're very fun. You should look them up.
Oh, I think we should also describe their roles a little bit. So
Okay.
Aster, you might have noticed his apron. He is the cook of this little ragtag group. Sinnet is the doctor.
Yep, the medic.
And here we have our
Ferrix.
next beautiful boy.
Beautiful man.
Based off of
Chaos
Fossa.
Incarnate.
Oh, very much Chaos Incarnate.
Yes, as Johnum said, he's the carpenter.
And
Johnum is a Ferrix
favorite.
stan. Johnum is a Ferrix stan. I can't remember. I think it was Extreme Bulk Guy an Aster. I can't remember what Extreme Bulk Guy was. I do know that
I think Grenade had a favorite too.
it was Audio Chaos liked Aster. It was a winged boy.
Right, Audio Chaos.
I know that one. Plot twist, they're all main characters. I mean, you know, in a little bit, Dorky David, a tad. Audio didn't do anything. Audio is just an Aster stand for the winged boys.
Yes, he loves the feathers.
And then we
Evidently.
have my
Which is
favorite
great.
boy,
He loves feathers.
Milano, captain of our ragtag pirate crew. He is
Also known as the Power of the Seas.
Yes, he is supporting main.
But don't let that intimidating name fool you.
We'll just say he didn't give himself that name.
He did not give himself that name, surprisingly.
And he is based off a black caiman, which is a crocodilian. Yep, there you go, Johnum. Beautiful. And then, last but certainly not least,
Here's the boy, the
here
legend.
is Hotson, our main character. And there we go. That's everybody. He is not part of the pirates originally. He is on his own nautical adventure.
A researcher trying to prove himself. And he ended up on this island by mistake. And he thought it was abandoned. He thought he was going to get a vacation. And boy, was he wrong.
And there we are. That is everybody. And now,
Everyone.
after talking about that, we should indeed talk about consistency. As Dorky David started off, he said that consistency in writing is the hardest part, especially when you write at different times and during different moods.
Definitely. And you know what? That's actually a fantastic place to start off with, because what you're saying is completely true. Sometimes uh, when you return to a project, especially if you've like been gone from it for a while, you took a hiatus, or even just regular breaks in between working on it, you can forget some details sometimes, or you could forget the tone you were originally going for. I know there were definitely days for me where I worked on a script over the course of like 3 days back to back, and it was like one day was a really good day personally and the other was really bad, and that does kind of affect your writing to a degree. um so how to maintain consistency, because consistency, I think we all know what it is and we all know it's important, but I think it can be very hard to explain how it works, because like I said earlier, it's very broad and it encompasses a lot of things. You have character consistency, and you know that breaks down even further into dialogue, personality, actions. Then you have plot consistency, which breaks down into how do the characters respond to that plot? How does the world you created respond to that plot? How does the world operate within this plot? Um, so it can be a lot to balance. Uh, Dorky David says, I found that jumping around can help. Not writing linear, but writing what your mood is, because it can bring that emotion into the work. So Dorky David, I have to ask, when you're like, say you're in a really good mood, do you find yourself only working on like quote unquote happy upbeat scenes to kind of match your mood, and not really focus on different toned scenes, just to make sure like you're not accidentally coloring it with that emotion you feel in the moment? I'm very curious to know. Because I'll be honest, at least with the comic, and a lot of times in my writing as well, I don't jump around too much. Mostly because the way Ori and I make this comic is pretty linear. We go from script 1 to script 2 to script 3 all in order. Because that's just kind of how it works. Like, we kind of need to have that plan before we can move on to the next thing.
I think that's a luxury that we don't particularly have, being in
It would be very hard with the medium we've chosen.
Exactly. So like, if you're writing a book, right? If you're writing a book, or even if you're writing like a graphic novel that's supposed to be, that entry is supposed to be published all at once, right? Any sort of thing where you write like the whole story, or, you know, like a big full arc of the story all at once, you can definitely jump around and have that ability. But I think since we're releasing week to week, right, it's kind of important that we have next week's things done, right, that we have it out in order. But I will say, Mars, we do kind of jump around in a vague idea sense, though. For example, we didn't have the backstories necessarily fleshed out when we started writing it, but, you know, we sort of did come back to those a little later. Exactly, Shimbo Guy, you would release it all at once.
Yeah, and that's a very good point to mention, because that is something we do. It's not writing directly for the comic, because we're not writing out scripts or anything, but we're still jotting down ideas and piecing together plot elements that will become relevant later on. In that case, I would say, yeah, jump around as much as you want, because sometimes those details that come into your story later, you may want to start setting up within the first third of your story. Otherwise, and this doesn't happen all the time, you could certainly introduce elements whenever you feel is appropriate, but sometimes that little bit of foreshadowing, it can be nice to have, and it gives the audience clues as to what's going on, how this world works. But what's the biggest way to maintain consistency? I know some techniques that I use, particularly with dialogue. If you feel your character has said something important that you feel plays a big role in, oh, Anima asks what they're looking at, Ori. Well, you are looking at Hotsun.
This is Hotsun. He's curled up and afraid that Milano's going to eat him because he has met Milano for the very first time. He sees this very handsomely intimidating Cayman man. I had to. Very important. Looming over him. Okay.
Sure we're not writing a
Nom nom. Indeed. Indeed. No. Very quick aside. I was redrawing the cover concept art for the comic, and I definitely made Milano and Hotsun interact a lot more than they were in the original one, and I literally said to Mars, I was like, Mars, like, I hope people don't think this is a B. Because it's not. Like, hell yes, we ship them, but that's not the point of the story, right? Like, that's not the point of the story.
But that's what a user for.
Exactly.
No, that would drag us into another topic that we have discussed at length before.
Yeah. So Hotsun is very scared. He's curled up right now. You'll probably realize it a bit more after I color him fully.
It's so funny you say that, Vix, because I was having a discussion with Ori the other day, and this is going into a bit of a tangent. So much for talking about consistency. But
it's plot related.
Ori mentioned that you cannot have a magical girl anime without some kind of BL subtext. So the fact that you're saying everyone's got a secret BL subplot, you just reminded me of that.
So magical girl would be GL subtext, right? It's whatever the magical, like, whatever the magical people in that, media are, one of them has to be gay for another one, right? Like that's subtext. It's just innate, right? Second thing is that if you want to write a good scoundrel story, there's a very specific element, and you have the bi scoundrel, right? And then you have the straight-laced best friend, the scoundrel best friend, I don't really care, but they're gay for each other secretly. And then you have the love interest that's trying to push that, like, no, they're straight, right? They're straight. And it's like, you don't have to be straight to, like, women as well as men, I don't know. That's all I'm gonna say. Every good scoundrel movie, this is the,
I'm educating Hollywood on that one.
This is the, I gotta tell you, Road to El Dorado, Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas, fantastic scoundrel movies, blatant gay subtext, all I'm gonna say.
Very gay subtext.
No, exactly, Vix, exactly.
What Dorky David wrote here, and I support this 100%. Reread your work. That is key.
Yes.
That is a big one. It is time consuming. It is arduous. It may even be a little embarrassing for you because you might not want to really reread. Oh my god. read your work. But it has to be done. Not just for grammar, not just for spelling, but to make sure everything stays consistent across the entire story. Dorky David also mentions Word is perfect for putting notes. I completely agree. And this is what I was about to go into before we went on that tangent. Keep notes. If you write a line of dialogue that you think will come back into play later on, or you write a line of dialogue that gives some context to who this character is, like, for example, a character might say something along the lines of, I don't see my aunt very often. They're coming over this Saturday. Well, you might jot that down to remind you, okay, this character doesn't see their aunt often. They cherish this time together. That might be something that plays a role later on. This might affect how the aunt and that character relate to each other and interact. Like, is their interaction going to be awkward, or is it going to be like, this is the special time we have, so let's cherish it? So definitely keep notes on the little things that you think will come back in your story. That's one way for keeping track of, especially with character dialogue. If you're planning that foreshadowing, or leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for your audience, definitely you want to keep track of that. Because the last thing you want to do is have your clues go all over the place, and then when the reveal comes, it makes no sense because the audience couldn't follow what you were trying to do.
And I think that
another way.
Oh, I just think that ties into sort of the having somebody else read it too, right?
Definitely.
Is the idea that like you have all the information, right? And this is something that like I learned in scientific writing, is that you have all the information, right? But the idea is that the person reading it probably doesn't. So you might understand where you were going with, you know, that twist or that, you know, reveal or that mystery or whatever, but you didn't come across in the writing properly because you knew what was going on, right? So you could read between the lines. So having somebody else who doesn't know is helpful. And having somebody else read it.
That's a trap. I'm sorry to interrupt
that.
No. You really made me think of something there, is that you do know your story, or at least you know the main beats of it and the crucial elements of it. So when you're hiding stuff in subtext or backgrounds, you might see it, but your audience might not. And
exactly.
That's a very good point to make, because you just do not have that outsider looking in perspective.
You know too much.
You are the writer. You created this story. You know far too much. So you need to have that outsider looking in perspective to make sure, like, can the general audience follow this? Can someone who's not aware of the story follow this trail of logic I have left for them? So yeah, fabulous point, Ori. Fabulous point.
And you know, it's sort of.
Anima. That's awesome. I'm glad your friend liked it.
But the other thing is that so Mars and I actually had Dylan read the story. Well, at least the first 3 episodes.
This is
a
how
while
we
ago.
Discovered our episode 1 sucked and we threw it out.
Exactly.
And redid it.
Because we, you know, we're looking at under the lens of like we know what's going to happen, right? Like we know that the rest of the story is worth reading.
Exciting parts are around the corner.
Exactly. But to someone who has no idea, right, who's just coming into this comic to try and get into it, might not pick up on that. And so Dylan was like, yeah, he was like, I love episode 2, I love episode 3, episode 1, real boring. And we're like, all right. So yeah, no, exactly, Vix, we made a prologue instead. And that's exactly what we did. And then that has caused me to redraw both episode 1 and episode 3, but...
Vix, I bet you relate so much to the phrase, kill your darlings. Because we had to do it with our first ever prologue, and I'll be honest, at least for me, it wasn't too hard. I was ready to toss it out the window and be like, yes, I've learned how to write better dialogue and script a scene a lot tighter. Like, I am ready to chuck this and start over.
It's definitely a skill, Dorky David.
You know, it's definitely, it can be hard sometimes. Because, like, oftentimes the first episode is the first thing you created. I know for us it was. And it was the first thing we had uploaded to Webtoon, and that was a very prideful moment. That was honestly, like, oh my gosh, it's there, it's up. But I honestly didn't have too much of a problem killing that darling.
Honestly, 90% of my reservations with it were solely based on the fact that, like, I would have to redraw a whole thing. Right, like is more on the time consumption, right? Because by then we had decided that we were going to release in January of 2023, and so we wanted to, you know, keep that, right? We didn't want to push that back and have it be in like production hell or something. So, you know, that was very important to us. So it was very like, okay, if we kill this darling, right? If we nuke episode 1, which I was pretty fine with because, again, the art is very old compared to what I could do now. But it was like, now I have to draw a whole nother episode that's like due, you know, like right away. Because we have a bit of a backlog and it's due like right away. And then Unfortunately, I had improved in my skill much more than I had expected, if I'm being honest. And I thought that I had...
Not so great for the comic.
Yeah, I thought that I had sort of accepted that episode 2 and episode 3 were not, like, my favorite art-wise, but unfortunately, the dip on quality between prologue and then the new episode 1 and episode 2 was just too great, and I was super concerned that people would start reading it and just like dip out after the prologue because the art dropped so much, right? And I had like accepted that episode 4 is still not like perfect. It's not at the quality that I am now, but hello, Bart Starter. It's a consistency.
Hey,
and this ties in with consistency, if I'm being honest, Mars, because it's consistency in art style, right? And
yes. Oh, no, definitely. And there is something to be said for that.
When you make a webcomic, when you make a long webcomic, you have to understand that you are getting into a multi-year endeavor, right? Like, this is not something that's gonna just go out there and be gone. This is a while. We're not even releasing every week. We're releasing every other week because we don't want to kill ourselves. And, but we're also releasing relatively long episodes compared to like a lot of other Canvas comics that release weekly. So it does sort of balance it out. But you have to accept that drawing a comic, that continuously drawing these characters, you are going to improve. That's just how it works, right? Like
episode 16 is not going to look like episode 2.
You will not stagnate. However, the difference is that when you read a comic in order alongside, or even when you just read it through in order, you don't notice those small changes as much, right? It sort of just gradually happens because you are reading as the artist improves, right? Yeah. So it doesn't feel like... But I bet that...
And you slowly become accustomed to it.
Exactly, Turkey David. But if you go back on an individual's sort of art, like a comic, right? Like anyone who is writing the comic on their own and doing the comic on their own as like an indie thing, and you read their whole thing and they've been doing it for like 7-10 years, and you go back to that episode 1, you suddenly like realize, you're like, dang! They improved so much, but when you're reading it, you don't notice.
Night and day difference.
Oh, it's incredible. So what happened to us is that the course of about 2 years happened between entries now 1 and 2 and what the prologue was. And hello, Oscar.
Hey, Oscar. And
it it really shows in the art. And so at least while episode now 3, quote unquote 4 is still like less quality than the sort of work I'm putting out now. 1, there'll be 2 weeks in between reading episode 3 and episode 4, so maybe people will forget a little bit. And 2, it's not as big of a gap as it is between the prologue and the original episodes 2 and 3. And so it's
that can certainly be the hope.
Definitely. I hope that it'll still good. I feel confident that, you guys who are interested in the comic have seen what I do now and will power through for me. But that is why I have decided to put myself through completely redoing the first 2 episodes after I did the prologue. And yeah, that's what we're doing right now.
Blessing in disguise, because you did say you missed doing Milano and Hotson interaction.
It's definitely bittersweet, right? It's like I could have been spending all this time on finishing, more episodes and having a bigger backlog, but
I see a Cinder avatar.
Oh hey,
popping in. You can't sneak up anymore.
You can't sneak up anymore.
No, I can't. Wait, can I could probably put you guys on too. Let me turn you guys on.
Yes.
Maybe you can.
Welcome, Cinder.
How are you guys doing? What have you guys
good. We're talking about
We're
consistency.
talking about consistency tonight.
In writing and art.
A little bit into writing. Ori just talked a little bit about art. I was actually just about to respond to Dorky David because he mentioned keeping track of your character's goals as well for consistency. Yes, Dorky David, so important. because relatability to characters and compassion for characters comes from understanding who they are and by extension what their motivations and goals are. So if you're not consistent in that, your audience has trouble connecting with that particular character. So yeah, spot on. You seem to you definitely understand a lot about writing, Dorfkey David, for sure.
What are you guys up to tonight?
Talking about comic
Ori
stuff.
is working on the comic, and we are currently doing Comic Corner.
So we're just
Comic
discussing, comic-related writing and art sort of topics. Today's is consistency.
Yes. We
You know,
try to
keeping
find a
consistency.
topic every week to talk about.
Okay.
And what we can actually, yeah.
This is I'm doing a Who Framed Roger Rabbit situation with you guys on my stream tonight.
Oh yeah.
Ooh, how does that work?
It's cartoon and real life mixed together.
Exactly.
Oh, I
Because
see.
he's a flesh streamer right now, and we're the
I'm being a
PNG
flesh streamer
tubers.
right now.
Ori, I'm amazed you figured that out so quickly. I'm literally sitting here like, why are we solving a mystery? Who's getting dipped?
No. It's Amazing World of Gumball vibes too, those couple of SpongeBob episodes.
Oh my god, yes.
Variety.
Absolutely.
But Mars, if you want to talk about our consistency blunder that you caught and fixed in
Yes.
their writing.
So that was actually going to bring me very, very briefly. I mean, a lot of these same rules. Yes, Vix, it is. This is indeed the one, the only. And he has an avatar. On
Yes,
our,
it's new. It's a
side.
week old now.
Yes. Happy birthday. Week old. Woo! Oh, I'm glad your headache disappeared.
That does sound like an addiction, though.
Yeah, I was about to say, that sounds like what Dylan had.
It is what Dylan had.
Chai tea. Apparently that's the secret to weaning yourself off
Tea is just
coffee.
better for you than coffee. It has significantly less caffeine in it.
Ori, I think you'd preach that all day, every day.
I do. I don't enjoy coffee, personally. I know PC Perini would come for my throat, though, so...
Oh.
But
Getting
yeah.
back, being consistent about consistency. The same rules very briefly I'll touch upon, like world building as well. Like keep notes on... Oh, thank you for the raid, Cinder.
Yeah, I didn't want to be in charge of anything anymore. So I'm hanging out with you guys.
Hey,
Yes,
no
thank you for
worries.
the raid.
But,
Guys, if you're here and you don't follow me, go follow me. I'm gonna promote myself.
And you're here, and if you're here and don't follow us. See? Trades.
Follow
Tradesies.
us.
First
Check
of all,
us out on
yeah.
Webtoon, January 30th.
That's
Please,
me.
please, please.
What's
That is
January
our
30th?
debut. That is
Our
when
comic
we
release.
debut Outcasts.
Oh my god, I'm so excited.
I know.
I'm so excited.
It's
Not
so
January 3rd,
close.
January
Yeah,
30th.
30th.
There you go.
Not
there
the third,
you
not
go.
the third, not the third.
Let's
Please.
go January 3rd. I'm not ready.
Oh, I'm not ready. I'm barely
I'm
ready
so
for the
not ready.
30th.
I got cosplay videos. I got promotional stuff. I got a whole bunch of stuff coming up.
No. Anybody
I need
who's
months
expected on the
to do
3rd,
that.
you
No,
can
no.
you can instead participate in the Draw This in Your Style challenge, which will be happening.
Ooh,
Yes,
Ari
that'll
the
be held
Crafter.
during the
Thank
month.
you for the follow.
Ah, yes. Very nice, Arya. It's great. All the D&D stuff, he's over there. Learn how to balance.
Oh yes, phenomenal videos.
Do you know?
This,
Okay, I
this
don't
guy
want.
puts out quality.
Oh, okay, if you're too nice to me, I will blush and I won't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, your face
And
is
then
already
you'll
like-
rage quit. That is true. Look, can you blush? I think
That
PNG
that
Cinder
will
would blush
require an upgrade
blue.
at some point.
Oh,
I-
blue blush, yes.
I will admit
That looks
that
amazing.
I am following somebody who is posting tutorials about how to VTuber model creation. However, I'm still not there
Small
yet.
steps.
I'm
Small
still not there yet. It will probably be a never on that if I'm being honest. But I'm interested in watching about it, so
Worth a shot.
yeah.
But yes. So consistency in world building, same rules apply. I mean, investment is what you're going for here. You want your audience to be invested. And that comes from having consistent rules in the world, consistent logic. Like, how do the characters interact with this world? what creatures exist in these worlds. Like I said before, what rules exist. And the more it's interesting. It's kind of like the more rules you have, and don't go overboard with the rules, but the more grounded it feels, the more someone can get invested. Because if you have rules and you have a grounded sense of this world, a person could see themselves in that world, and that's what creates investment.
I also can I chime in with a thought here?
Totally, please.
Especially when you're talking about world building in a sense of trying to make distinct things that have a feel to them that people can kind of get their teeth into, that is interconnected. I think a really important element is to think about how whatever your world building elements that you're putting in are, how they add to the issues of the main characters at least as much, if not more, so than how they add to the solutions that the characters have.
That's actually something we have.
Because what obstacles are they going to come up against? Is this a system where they comfortably fit in? Or is this a system that they constantly have to fight? Are there some characters who have to fight and others who fit comfortably in? Like, those are questions you need to answer, and you have to be consistent about it. That's the buzzword for today.
And if the tension of the story is tied into the world building of the story, it will intrinsically have you as the reader more emotionally invested in that world building, because it becomes pertinent to like making sure the characters that you care about like get through it.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I'm trying to think of an example where that wasn't done successfully, just to paint an idea in our viewers' minds, but I'm really having trouble thinking of one, to be honest. Ori, Cinder, can you think of any?
I can think of a couple, but they're
what
not.
You got?
Well, the problem is the things that I can think of are all situations of things that did not get to the published stage, and I think that is a big reason why they didn't. Like, I can think of a lot of, like, when I was in college, I did create for my bachelor's degree, it was in creative writing, which is a stupid degree to get, but I enjoyed getting it. A huge aspect of writing in college for me were there were a lot of people that wrote science fiction, a lot of people that wrote fantasy, and the difference between the good fantasy and the bad fantasy was often the good fantasy. The fantasy added an element of tenseness or suspense or danger.
Mm-hmm.
And in the bad fantasy, the fantasy was like, it either was exactly what it needed to be to make the story move forward, or it was essentially the main character is invincible and it was like a power fantasy from the writer. You know what I mean?
So kind of that self-insert, I am clearly imagining myself as this character as I'm writing it type of story.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to think if there's any good example of that from fiction.
What exactly was the question, Mars? I kind of missed it.
So the question for me is I was trying to think of examples of bad world consistency that led to either a confusing plot or just very little investment from the audience from you personally.
What's your definition of world?
I couldn't think of any off the top of my head. So when I say worlds, I'm thinking about a setting in general. Like maybe the rules weren't established very clearly. Okay.
I have
probably some Kingdom Heart bullshit, maybe. Kingdom Heart has a bunch of stupid world building that doesn't make any sense.
I have
Kingdom
a very
Heart is all over the damn place. I still adore the series, but the story is a mess.
I have one that I told you, Mars, that I think fits in here because I think it is world building related because it is with how the main villain works, right?
Oh, Dorky David mentions Legend of Korra.
Oh, yeah, they kind of screwed that one up a little bit there. They did.
That one's a little surprising because they had a perfectly good world.
Yeah, but they tried to bring it
the first season
into the modern era, and then they decided to use a lot of things that were previously established as like really horrible things, but they're just, nah, everybody can do it now. And it's like, or really hard things, it's like, no, everybody, like lightning bending, right? Like in Avatar, that was like a big freaking deal, right? Like only the top tier people could lightning bend. Like they didn't even teach Zuko how to do it. They just told him how to redirect it, right? Like it's not, you know, like very specific. In Legend of Korra, like any firebender can go down to the freaking power plant and lightning bend to freaking power the city. Like that was supposed to be a special thing, you know?
So that's undermining its own consistency.
Exactly. You know, there's an argument for like the metal benders also having that sort of problem, but I disagree with the sense that like Toph invented that. Not that it was necessarily hard, that she just figured out how to do it and thus taught everybody who knew how to do it, right? It wasn't just like any earthbender could do it. It was the specific subset of earthbenders that were taught by Toph or her daughter to be in the police. Like, at least I'm okay with that.
I think you're of the same mind as ECM.
Yeah, exactly. At least I'm okay with that. But like, no. Freaking Iroh was like, I can't teach Zuko how to lightning bend. I'm just going to teach him how to deflect it, right?
Yeah.
And yet now every firebender can do it.
It was very cool to see, and it was a big moment in the original.
Yeah, David. Yeah.
So there's a lot of
That's a big one
happening there, because not only is it undermining its own consistency, it's undermining a character arc that was achieved in a previous season as well.
Yeah, it's like kind of weird.
It's retroactively doing damage.
It really is.
Ouch.
I think it was this. I think it was an issue of bright lights, big city. You know, like they wanted.
Yeah,
to, like,
no. That
they to, like, up the stakes in all directions.
They literally wanted it to be.
Rule of cool took over.
I think it did. I think a lot in that show was really cool because they had so many bending like shenanigans, right?
Well, every single type of bending gets an upgraded version.
Or like a dual version, right? Like suddenly, like Bolin can lava bend, and that was like
lava
special
bending
thing.
Is upgraded,
you know,
bending, air flying is upgraded, air bending, and then you know, they need it to be. It's like, how do you?
It's all got to be elevated because it's the next generation.
Yeah, and it's like the whole fucking point of the show in the original form is it's all about like balance. Like it's 4 seasons, 4 elements. Like it is like, you know, it's very intentionally paced as well as in all these directions. And then you have to make a new one, and it's like half of the wonder of the first, not half, but a lot of the wonder of the original show is exploring the different elements and their potential and how they interact with societies and different civilizations that have them. And it's like, okay, we know all that now. So it's like, no, there's no longer mystery to like what it would be like to earthbend. We know earthbending. So they gotta add new things, you know? It's like, all right, well, what if some of the earth is really hot?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is power
There's
creep.
definitely something lost when you over-explain everything as well, too. Like, in Back to the Future, like, they don't over-explain the flux capacitor. They just say, here's how it works. It needs plutonium.
Because you don't need to know, right? Like, you don't need to know. And that's something we talked about before with how our collars work, right? Like, so technically our collars are separate species. They're Homo exalium. So that's a separate species, and, you know, why can't I remember what we're freaking called? Sapiens. Homo sapiens. I had a brain fart right there. Homo sapiens. So technically they're different species. Now, first things first, definition of a species. Kind of vague, kind of amorphous. A lot of shenanigans going on there. Number 2, come on. Like, am I really going to go into and, like, try to explain the genetic interworkings of this whole society? Because I don't want to simplify it too much, right? Like, I don't want to, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if I can or can't make a Punnett square about them. Like, it doesn't matter if I know that certain genes are
background. It makes it more intriguing.
It makes
as well.
And on top of that, it allows for certain mysteries to sort of be revealed, right? Like, it allows for that mystery to sort of exist. You don't want your story to
feel like sitting through math class.
Exactly. Because that's something that's sort of fun. This is kind of in the same vein of, like, world building with consistency. There's a lot of media, and I see it a lot in webcomics, that sort of have, like, a lore dump at the beginning. And I think the intention of that
I've seen that in a lot of prologues.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the intention of that is rooted in a desire for consistency, right? In a desire to, like, this is the background, like, here it is. Like, you can't say that I didn't,
See, there's definitely a reason for writers to go that route. It serves a whole bunch of purposes, because if you treat your prologue that way, one, like you said, you're setting up the rules like straight from the get-go. Like, here are the rules, audience. This is the logic our world operates by, and this is the world you're going to be in as you read this story. And that's a fine way of approaching it. It also sets up expectations as well, and you may be able to get across some things about the characters, but for the most part, like, for example, if you're going like for a Lord of the Rings-esque type of prologue, half of the time the characters in that type of prologue aren't the ones you're following for the majority of the story. So for the sake of establishing rules and establishing consistency, you kind of give up creating an attachment and compassion for your characters. And I think there's a balance that you can find in that. With our prologue, especially with our trailer. I went over this, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago when I talked about the trailer, and I'll cover it very briefly, but there's a lot of foreshadowing happening in that trailer, and there's a lot you can infer about the world we've created from the trailer alone. Now, sometimes that show don't tell method can go over people's heads if it's too subtle. So it's definitely a balance. I know the writer of Bleach ran into this problem because he did not explain in his manga, at least from what I hear, he never explains the power system directly unless it's crucial to the arc that the manga is going through. But everything about the power system in Bleach can be understood through how the characters talk about their powers, or like the quips they throw in battle, or the brief explanation of, this is why my power is doing more damage to you. But it's all subtext. Literally every single piece of it is subtext. And a lot of people were frustrated at that because they did not read between the lines, or I should say didn't think they need to read between the lines in order to understand this power system, this very deep and involved power system I found was created. So that could be another trap you run into as well.
And I think you answered your own sort of thing, Mars, in that, with the idea of that they didn't know they were supposed to be looking in the subtext, right? Like, I think, because take something like Gravity Falls. Take something like the Five Nights at Freddy's community. The second that anybody realizes that there is hella subtext.
I'm obsessed with that sort of writing.
Yeah, exactly. But once people realize that there is that content to be, uncovered, right? There is that theorizing to do. There's a whole community for that, like Vic says. But I think the downfall of that was not making it known that you should do that, right? Like, when you explain things as blatantly as, I've never bleached anything, so when you explain certain parts of it, it sort of sets up a precedence that you're going to, like, telegraph everything. But if you keep it all sort of in the subtext, then it gives that more like, oh, we gotta figure it out. We gotta learn about it, like Gravity Falls or, all that sort of stuff. Hello?
Oh, you cut out for a second for me there towards the end. That might have been on my end.
But yeah, it's just the idea that you have to set up, you have to prepare your readers for that sort of level of deep dive, I think.
Well, yeah,
is the big deal.
It's an expectation to have of your audience, and it's kind of a big one, because here they are reading something for entertainment and enjoyment, now you're asking them to read between the lines for something, and I know we definitely do that with our comic as well.
But thankfully our
I
stuff
think
is...
we pull off a balance where the balance is you can still appreciate the work
Exactly.
without understanding everything.
And
like,
then
we have a reveal in one of our seasons that's going to shake up the dynamic of the cast.
And whether or not you saw it coming, it's still good.
Understandable whether or not you were able to predict it. Oh, what's with the maniacal laughter?
That was such a defensive. Whether or not it's good, it's.
Oh no! It's more the idea that like that was something to be specific for. Because I think No Evil does a similar thing, right? No Evil's kind of confusing. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah.
It's
if
meant.
If you don't know what to look for,
it's meant for rewatch value.
It feels random, but exactly, it's meant for rewatch.
But I'll still say,
you rewatch it, you have that greater appreciation that the creator spent that much time laying these breadcrumbs for you.
But I'll still say that whether or not you get it, it's still fun, right? Like, it's still, the characters are still compelling. Like, you know, it still makes you want to watch the next episode, even if you're like, I don't really know what's going on.
Good luck on your exam, Johnum.
Good luck, Johnum.
Great sleep.
You have an exam, you son of a gun.
Finals. It's finals time. Dylan has finals tomorrow. He's a final tomorrow, too.
Remind me. Don't remind me.
I have to. It's important.
Bye! Nah, it's all good.
It does give it a mystical quality.
Too terrible this year, luckily.
But yeah, I think it all comes to that sort of setting expectations, right?
Yeah.
Because the other thing is like
And setting expectations plays a role in consistency as well, because if you're consistent from the get-go, your audience will know what to expect. That also ties into plot twists as well.
Exactly.
You want to make sure that the plot twists can exist within the rules of this world that you have created.
And if you have consistency, you can like foreshadow the twists better, right? In the sense of like if you have it consistent that like, you know, only the rich people have this sort of gem, but you never like state it, right? You never state that only the rich people have this sort of gem, but you show that like all the rich people that the characters interact with have this gem on their clothing, and then you find out that one of the characters you thought was a you know, a poor guy has this gem, and it's like, you know, because you were consistent, right? But the second you accidentally forget that a rich person should have a gem, or you give a gem to, you know, a not rich person, whatever, you know, your narrative is, you've messed it up, right?
Well, that can also be the thing theories are made of, because then in your example, if they see the poor person with the gem, then they're like, maybe they're actually a rich
Well, that's
person.
what I'm saying, right? So, but that's what the consistency allows, is that allows for that to exist.
So, David, in response to what you've said, I've always believed that a twist works when it's not just about the audience. Like, honestly, whether or not the audience is shocked, I think shock value twists have very little
they don't have rewatch value.
Well, not only do they not have rewatch value, but they have very little impact because it's a one and done. Like, once it happens, you move on. But if it affects the characters and they have a visceral response to that, then I think you have struck gold. Because ultimately it's the characters that the story is happening to. If the characters are affected by that plot twist in a significant way, that's all you need. Like, I am firmly of the mindset that the audience does not need to be shocked by a plot twist.
Well, I think
as long as the characters have enough of a reaction and it shakes up the dynamic in a way that is significant, that the plot twist actually had relevance to the story. It wasn't just that's a thing, let's go right back to doing what we did before.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a bad twist.
I think that's the very
why
specific
does it even
bit.
Exist?
Is that the plot twist is for the character. a character
Yeah.
needs to be shocked by the plot twist, not
Yeah.
not the audience.
It's more a bonus if the audience is shocked too.
I
But I think this idea of I think creators have it mixed up where if the audience is shocked by the plot twist, that means they were invested in your story. I mean, it can. They're not necessarily wrong, but I think an audience can still be invested and not be shocked by a plot twist.
I honestly think that the audience that is like, I called it, and it's not like specifically you called it because it's like a trope or something, are more invested, right? Like, imagine you're theorizing the Gravity Falls twin uncles reveal, right? Like, imagine if you predicted that.
Yeah.
And
like
then
you
it
were able
happens.
to call
And
that.
you're like, I called it. Like, that means that you are way more invested in watching the show, and that, you know, they did a good job of sort of like, you know, foreshadowing it, that person was more invested than the person that is like, oh, what? Oh, I didn't expect that. Just mathematically, you know?
Push on subverting expectations. And I think a lot of creators are doing that to a fault nowadays. Like, not even because they want to, but because they have to. It's just the norm now. Like, literally every movie that comes out has like a twist villain, and it's like, is it needed? Is it necessary? No, but it catches the audience off guard, so therefore it must be.
But exactly, Extreme Bolt Guy, I think it's much... I personally have the same sort of feeling, that it is much cooler when you get to predict it. You know, like when I predicted the fence, right? Like, that's a much more satisfying sort of thing that is... that I got it right? You know, that like, I followed the clues and came to the end goal. And I think that's why people like Ace Attorney, right? Is because even if it is twisty, like, if they did it well, it makes sense, you know?
Mysteries in general. There was
they're one of my
fantastic
favorite genres.
movie I watched the other day called See How They Run. And it's a very, like, tightly contained story. They got all the clues in there. And they do try to mislead you with a red herring. And it was such a good red herring. It honestly had, I was watching it with my family. It had all of us convinced that was the direction it was going in.
Oh, damn.
And then it completely went another direction, but it didn't pop out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
The clues were still there. We were just looking at them from the wrong perspective.
Yeah. I like Knives Out. In that sense, sort of, right? Like, it's that sort of thing where it's like, oh, you really think that this is happening, and they're really pushing it, and then it's like, oh, wait, why didn't we think about this? You know?
Yeah, here's what's actually going on.
No, exactly, Darky David, exactly. If somebody can predict it, and it's not just like a crapshoot, I think that writer did a much better job than the writer that just everybody was like, and then, you know, every time you watch it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think,
See,
yeah.
It's like the one example I think of with that, I think of Mayor Bellwether from Zootopia. Everyone says she's such a terrible twist villain. I disagree. Because the clues are there.
Oh, yeah. They really are.
It's not like they don't exist. It did not come out of nowhere.
Same
Could she have been a better villain? I mean, sure. But she's not a bad twist.
Similar thing with Hans from
Frozen. Out of nowhere.
Right. Similar thing with Hans from Frozen. Again, kind of a lame villain, kind of a weak sort of motive, all this sort of stuff. Whatever. Kind of eh. However,
we're not factoring that into the equation at the moment. That's a discussion for another day.
Yeah. However, after you see the movie and you see that, you know, again, I'm not very... When I'm in a movie, I'm just sort of there for the ride, so I'm not thinking about it hardcore. My theorizing comes when I watch everybody else's YouTube videos on it later on. But so, when it was like, no, he's a villain, it was like, crazy. And, that we can do that one, PCM. We could do Comic Corner villains. We can definitely do Comic Corner villains.
I don't see why not.
But what was I saying? But when you watch the movie again, and if you pay attention to Hans, it is definitely set up that he is a usurper, right? You watch his face, the way they animated his face in the Love is an Open Door song, when Anna says sandwiches till you finish each other's sandwiches, he looks so done. He looks so pissed off. I'm serious. You watch that scene, and this man is like, God, how long do I have to deal with this? Right? Like for just a split second. And then, of course, you see him like, he's the one handing out blankets, right? Like, he's getting in with the people. He's making a show that we have to go kill Elsa for the thing, right? Like, it's all his plan and sort of thing. So it's definitely like, it's set up that he was always, like, plotting before it is in the end, right? And so I think that's a check for him, just like we said about, before. Extreme Bull Guy brings up the big Hero 6 villain.
So just to add a quick thing about Hans, I think that fell into too much of the show don't tell category. At least on first initial viewing.
It's definitely a rewatch thing.
Rewatch if you know what to look for.
But I think that's still good. It makes it a good twist, right? Because you do get that shock. And then at the end you're like, oh, like it was always there. He was always being kind of sussy, and all this sort of stuff. I
do think they could have added a little more subtle dialogue to clue in that.
Unfortunately, he wasn't particularly in it.
Wasn't the focus.
Yeah, he wasn't particularly in the movie very much. So
here's the thing with a comic. We have time to dedicate to certain characters. Like, we can give them a certain amount of screen time. In an hour and 40-minute movie where you have a lot of characters and a lot of arcs going on, you only have so much time. Mm-hmm. Like, you gotta pick and choose who's getting the screen time and where it's going to pay off more.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the interest there is Elsa, her powers, and the relationship between the two sisters, not Hans. He's just a means to an end. He is a plot device.
He didn't even get a villain song, so...
He didn't even get a villain song.
We got a Kristoff song instead, and you know what? Based.
You know what? Fair trade-off.
Based. I'm here for Kristoff, so,
I'll take it. But, you were saying about Big Hero 6, Ori.
Oh, yeah, I think it was Extreme Bulk Guy mentioned the twist of the villain in Big Hero 6. And that one was a lot more blatant of sort of, like, trying to set it up, right? That, like, they, like, led up to it. But then it was kind of like a one and done sort of thing. It was a... Hero didn't struggle for a moment. You know what I'm saying?
I think the issue there is that, one, there were no clues laid out.
Not until they're blatantly in your face and they're like uncovering them right now.
He was a nice guy on the surface. Like, in essence, this was just kind of, for lack of a better term, something he did in his spare time, try to get his daughter back.
Yeah.
So that wasn't like hidden dialogue. That wasn't little breadcrumbs. It wasn't until Hero started actively pursuing who was behind the explosion that he started learning all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which is that's another way of revealing who your actual villain is.
But on top of that,
it can go like that. You can have a character who's like nice on the surface, and then in their spare time, not the nicest person.
But the thing is,
I think there are people want the breadcrumbs. They want it to make sense.
They definitely want the breadcrumbs.
With how gut-wrenching Tadashi
Well, exactly.
was.
I think that was the whole thing, right? There was one moment where it was like, Hero's like, okay, I'm gonna kill him with Baymax, right? And then there was like, resolve, and then it was just like, back to normal. There was never, like, because the other thing was like, if I remember correctly, the villains...
forgiveness pretty quickly.
They moved to, or just, like, I won't kill him, I guess, like, we'll bring him to justice, but I won't actively, like, murder a man that manslaughtered my brother. But
in the themes of the story, that makes sense.
My biggest thing is that I'm upset.
Been explored a little further.
I'm upset that the villain didn't have remorse. I don't remember his name, but if I remember correctly, he didn't know Tadashi died until Hiro brought it up. Like, he didn't know.
Yeah.
Or, like obviously, like, we know that was an accident, right? And so...
Did he say, like... I feel like there was a line about, like... Oh, Shamey got caught in the crossfires. Oh,
like, there's definitely a moment,
like,
but it's like,
this was your best student.
Yeah, like, you liked Tadashi. Like, you had a relationship with Tadashi, and so you have, like, no remorse at all of seeing his brother having, like, at least you might get your daughter back, right?
Like,
he will never get his brother back.
It doesn't even need to be verbally said. All they need to do is maybe have a flashback scene of the funeral.
You know, I don't know.
Maybe have him, like, standing in the distance, kind of looking over the procession and everything. And then, like, maybe he can't approach. Maybe he feels so guilty about what he's done, he just kind of turns and walks away. It's like he's kind of sealed his deal. There's no coming back from that.
Yeah, exactly. Just something. You know, he was very just lame about it. It was like he was such a nice guy, and it was like he was turned, you know, the vibe was that he was turned to, you know, unsavory means in order to save his daughter, you know, from this whole interdimensional shit. But, like, he just suddenly turned evil, and he was no longer a like, sympathetic villain, right? They wanted him to be sympathetic, and but because it was literally all his fault that Tadashi died, because Tadashi ran in to save him, right? Like, if you remember correctly.
They wanted him to be sympathetic, but it's also a comic book movie. So you gotta make him the big bad in the end somehow.
Yeah, and I think that was the downfall there.
Yeah. It's so interesting we got into talking about twists, but consistency is very important in that too.
Because the consistency of tone.
The breadcrumbs,
right?
The consistency of tone, the consistency of character.
Because that's what made...
I told you guys, I did warn you, this is a broad topic. You could literally go
it really
in
is.
a dozen directions with this.
But that's what made it bad, right? Like, that's what made the villain, I can't remember his name, Callahan or something, right? That's what made Callahan in Big Hero 6 not a good twist villain, because the tone was not consistent. You had this whole deal with how Hiro was trying to get over Tadashi dying, how Tadashi ran in to save Callahan, right? Like, that was like, he didn't just go in there to save someone. He went to save this man that did live, and it was his fault that Tadashi died, right? And so this is one of the darker... It was a Disney movie, right? It was a Pixar movie?
It was Disney.
Yeah, so this is one of the darker... Well, Pixar is Disney, but this is one of the darker... I
consider them separate.
Like, movies, right, that, like, Disney has put out with that die. Like, most of the time you don't see people die on, you know, quote-unquote, on screen, right? So it's like, and then that tone just totally shifts.
Not that brutally.
Yeah, and the tone just totally is like, nah, he feels nothing, and he is a robot, right? You know, and it was like, I don't know. That was not consistent.
It leaves a bit of a bad taste in your mouth.
It's just kind of lame, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of It's like Hiro should have killed him. I don't know.
Cinder, we've been talking a mile a minute. Do you have anything about twists or twist villains that you'd like to contribute? Any ones you like? Any ones you hate?
Or consistency in general.
I think that I don't have a specific villain twist that I like or hate that comes to mind, but the general concept of the villain, I like a good twist in general. I love a good twist. Good twists are my favorite. They're just so hard to be pulled off well, but I'm trying to think if there's any, like, ooh, that was an amazing one. I mean, I honestly, this is so fucking, it's so obvious, and it's such like it's almost like painfully too classic. But I really like Kaiser Soze from Usual Suspects.
Oh, I don't know that one.
So I won't give it away, but there's a movie called The Usual Suspects. And the basic premise of the movie is that somebody is being interviewed by the police, and he's essentially telling them the story of what the movie is. And the movie is about these group of, like, criminals that all got hired by this guy named Kaiser Soze, who's like some sort of super unknown, mysterious, like, high mafia crazy guy to, like, pull off a big heist for them. And it's just a really fun, really good action sort of thriller crime movie that has really unique characters that like really I don't know, it's just great. But it has one of the best, if not it is one of the best surprise twist endings of anything ever, and it's also like considered to be in general like so many movies and TV shows and stuff make reference to it.
Really?
Yeah, but it's one of those things where like when you're done watching the movie, it's one of those movies where as soon as you're done watching the movie, you want to watch the whole movie again immediately with the new information that you have. Because it totally shines the whole movie in a different light.
It recontextualizes.
And it's another one of those things
where
it like really builds, like it is very much what it is. And it's like it's you're like, oh yeah, like when you watch it again with the knowledge that you have, everything feels different. And works, but like feels different. And like suddenly like things that were like inconsistencies or maybe like plot holes become not plot holes. And it's just like, it's just really, really, it's just wild. But it's, I don't even want to say, because it's worth your time. It's a little bit of an older movie. I want to say it's from like the early 2000s or late 90s. But man, it's good. It's really good.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that one out. Sounds promising.
That reminded me of something that I forgot.
It's a long one. It's like a 2-hour movie. Or 2.5 hour movie. But it's good.
You want to know a really interesting scenario? Is the
Yes.
Mission Impossible?
Kevin Spacey's like the main character, so you gotta be comfortable with him being the main character.
Gotta be ready for that.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
But no,
Never
the Mission Impossible movie franchise, right? Mission Impossible 1, it's good, it's fine, it's a good spy movie. Mission Impossible 2, they went way too ham on the mask vibes, right? Like they leaned into it. They're like, this is in the universe, right? That these are like these realistic, tricksy masks that anybody could rip off their face at any time and be anybody else. And they went way too hard. Like the entire movie is like 90% somebody ripping off their face to show that they weren't the same person.
I haven't thought
right?
about that in so long. It's so much
so
of that movie.
That's the second movie, right? In the third movie,
Faces on Faces.
They tone it down a lot because I think they like realized that they went too far in movie 2, right? Because it's just twists at that point, right? Like once you know it, it's kind of boring. Obviously the action is still good, but like, the storyline is kind of boring because it just, oh yeah, that's, Ethan Hunt under that mask and it's not really the evil guy or whatever. And it's a one-time twist that you need to forget the movie before you can go and watch it again. Third movie is they actually are like, okay, we made masks too easy. So they actually like introduce certain levels of sort of, chameleoning that they have to do where they actually have to like kidnap the guy and force him to read like the text on this card in order for like to get his voice and like scan his face and all this sort of stuff. And they're like spraying wine on their shirt because he got wine spilled on his shirt and like they're like really pushing it. Right? So it's all about this one guy's mask, and it's very important that it works out, and that's what ends up with the movie. And honestly, if I remember correctly, it like didn't end up great for them. But the whole point is that it's Ethan Hunt under this guy's mask the whole time. In movie 4, they actually have the mask machine malfunction, and they can't go in with masks. So they have to rely on the fact that these people have never met before and don't know what each other look like. And so they don't have the masks at all. And so like that's a whole thing. And the twist in that movie is a completely different sort of like reveal that you're like, oh my God, that's kind of wild. And then by the time we get to the 6th movie, they have one of the best masked reveals ever in the movie.
Figure it out.
So they
takes
like
them a little time, but
it definitely takes. Honestly,
You know what? They worked with
movie
what they
4
had.
was my favorite movie until so movie 4 is Ghost Protocol. Rogue Nation is good, but it's more of like a prequel to to Fallout. Fallout is epic as hell. If you have not seen Mission Impossible Fallout, you should watch Rogue Nation because like I said, it is like a prequel. There's a bit of stuff going on that you might not get, but it's a really good movie. So that's sort of like an interesting thing about twists, right? They in movie 2 they were like, oh yeah, just the shock factor is great, right? In Fallout, it is a shock that it is a little bit surprising when you first watch it that it's like, oh, it wasn't the guy, but that's not the main part of the movie. There's a different twist that's the main part of the movie, and it's like hella good. So it's fantastic. It's great. I thought that was an interesting sort of thing where a movie franchise sort of realized that they were being way too twisty and dialed it back slowly and got it to where, again, one of the best movies.
They realized. They went back to the drawing board.
Really
they realized, hey, maybe we're overdoing it, and brought it back.
Well, I have an interesting consistency question because I just, about 2 weeks ago, watched season 7 of The Dragon Prince. Mm-hmm. And this has to do with time skips.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
because I think that's a large...
very heavy air quotes.
Yeah, I think that's a large...
I was like, oh my god, I feel like Ori will attack me.
No. Mars and I are on the same page.
We usually are.
It's just the idea that, like, I think that is a very hard thing to keep consistency, because the whole kind of point of a time skip is that it ruins the consistency, right? So there's like a whole, what do you have about that, Mars?
Time skips are interesting, and I think consistency comes down to what are you using the time skip for? Because I could think of an example with new Star Wars. There is a time skip between what was it? I think the Last Jedi, was it? No. It was the
I don't know the
Luke
names.
Blew up the final Death Star and killed Palpatine.
Number 6. Who cares? Number 6.
So for that time skip, not only did it bring us to a new protagonist, but it also made the former characters that we got to know and love and connect with, it kind of turned them a bit bitter and jaded because they had been up against hardships. And I mean, Luke especially, he didn't exactly come out on top. He became dejected, and he was very disillusioned with how things were turning out. So he was like, I'm going to become a hermit and be very pessimistic about everything from now on.
Become the new Yoda.
Oh, yes, well, even then, Yoda still made.
Well, Yoda wasn't pessimistic. He wasn't
pessimistic. I'll give Yoda credit.
But he was a hermit.
Become a pessimistic ass during
but he was a hermit.
Conclusion. But yeah, so I find there are a couple different ways you can use time skips. Definitely, Vix, one of the ways is to show character growth. I think classic example with that is Naruto Shippuden, Avatar.
But that makes sense, right?
Literally, they just had Aang knocked out after Crossroads of Destiny, and when he wakes up, oh, you have new hair. Oh, you have new powers. Like, it's not consequential, but it gets you further along in the timeline, and I would say it helps with avoiding any filler that might have possibly existed. Because that could be a problem you run into as well, where the time skip is helping you cut back on filler. Because if you don't have any story to tell, but you still need to get like to this later point in the timeline where you do have,
or like
story
there's
to
a time
tell,
of peace before the war starts up again, or anything like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
The one part of fiction, and whether or not this is fiction might be a debate, where I actually think time jumps work really well, is in D&D campaigns. Like,
interesting.
In between,
like, never thought about that.
Like after a big climactic, end of the world scenario, having it having like, okay, you have several months of downtime where like nothing hectic happens, and you can kind of, and what I've done before as a dungeon master that worked pretty well was I basically said, you guys have like 2 to 3 months to do stuff. Reach out to me personally. Tell me what those things are. And then when the players got back together and there were like little new things, they got to sort of like, it was like secrets that they got to have or share with each other about what they've been up to. So they got to like, they got to decide how much they shared or didn't share what they've been up to, and also to sort of have a little bit of insider information about what is going on in the world. I also created a plot. It works in campaigns where like it's not like everybody's living in the same house, but but I found it to be a really, really good way to sort of spice up entering into a new campaign, or entering into a new campaign arc.
That's super interesting that you mentioned that. I personally do not have any experience with that type of DMing, because like the way we play, it's usually like back to back the world is ending events.
I'll probably
Go
say
stop
Mars.
this boss, go stop that boss, go explore this dungeon. Like, I mean, we do get downtime. I'm not gonna say we don't, but never months at a time.
You likely never will, and the sole reason for that is because the way that the 3 DMs at our table, me included, the characters are there for a story, right? Like, we're not here where it's the characters go until they die or nobody wants to play them anymore, and it's just like a lot of different stuff going on. It is like this world and this session and this, this campaign was made to tell this story.
That's a really good point. The campaigns that I've done that on were all campaigns where the plot wasn't so much the game as
Exactly.
was just playing D&D with
Exactly.
people. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So
Vix,
Mars,
I'm wondering what you mean by we needed to work a character out of the story. I'm very intrigued by that.
I'm assuming that someone either had to stop playing or couldn't play anymore, and thus had to
kicked out because they were a meanie.
I didn't want to say that, Cinder, but
Why?
yeah, that's
If
something.
you hide the shadows, people will never learn how to deal with them.
I
Wow,
see.
Cinder calling it like he sees it.
Well, I'm colorblind. So
Oh no, it wasn't bad
Oh,
terms.
exactly.
It wasn't bad
Cinder, you
terms.
did call it.
Of course
damn.
I called it. Guys, the thing is, I have sight beyond sight.
I see.
I'm a
He really
Quetzalcoatlus. What's it called in Dune? I'm that guy.
Oh, I don't know.
No idea.
I'm the car.
I-
I'm the Dune guy.
Yeah.
Come at me in the comments. I fell asleep watching Dune. I was so
Oh.
bored until the giant sandworm appeared.
My father was very upset that like it ended where it did, and he's like, "What?" And it's like that's just kind of how it is. It's a long
It
book.
ended halfway through the first book.
Yeah, it's a long book.
Long book, and it felt like an even longer movie.
It's one of those things where it's like, would it have probably been better if they could have released both halves at once? Yes, but would anyone have like
Would I
sat
stay to
through
watch a
that?
4-hour
No.
movie? Absolutely not.
you know? So it's like,
Sorry that happened, Vix. At least you guys were able to keep playing.
Have you guys ever had to kick players before?
no.
No.
For the sole reason that so the way no, technically they weren't kicked out. When so Dylan and his brother were playing with 2 people that they had met online, and one of them just sort of slowly stopped being able to come, and we never heard from him again. The other person, quote unquote, essentially kicked himself out because he just got very annoyed, and I don't even know exactly what happened, but he just sort of left. It wasn't really like I don't even know. It was something like he was kind of young and very like main character syndrome, right? And then he was upset that he couldn't be the main character, and then he just left.
That's tough.
And then he
That's
just like
the
quit.
problem.
And it was like, okay, after that, everybody on our table is people we know in real life that we have been like very close with. So like I said, it's Dylan, his brother, and me, and then Dylan brought in his friend from law school that has been with us, and then I brought in Mars, who I've known since middle school. So it was sort of like we all know each other, we all know the vibes. So we're thankful that we sort of have this group that we don't super have to worry about that, and that anybody who might have some unintentional problems can pretty much be worked out.
Yeah, that's a good thing to have. My first gaming group where I was the dungeon master when I moved to the city that I am now, the Philadelphia city. It was all friends who get along really well as friends, but also have kind of like a very boyish, almost like a little bit of like a we kind of poke fun at each other and like get into it and have been friends since we were like 12 kind of vibe. And it created this dynamic where for some people the adjustment into like the sort of I I don't know, the social politeness that you need to have at D&D that you don't necessarily need to have in all situations, came very easily. And then for other people, not only could they not get it, it was like, because we had known each other for so long, talking about it was like talking to a wall. Because it was so weird. But what it turned into was that it's not, I don't feel bad about it. It's just like, there's like a couple guys in my friend group who I just won't run D&D for. And I love them. I see them at parties, and like we talk fondly about the games we played, but the way that they want to play D&D is it's just too kind of dickish and self-centered in a way that kind of is fun in a friend group because you can like poke fun at it and like ignore it. But when you're taking up space at the table, it becomes such a bigger deal. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah. So I don't play D&D with all of them. That's okay. We're still. I never had to kick somebody for being like sexually weird or.
That's good.
Or anything.
Those sound like the most awkward one.
I'm definitely thankful too.
Yeah, I feel like probably more often than not, those circumstances come when the dungeon master is struggling to like maintain the reins on the group a little bit, and it starts to spiral in a direction. Because I feel like if you have a fairly if you have a fairly like I'm running it like in charge vibe, you can kind of just say like we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Stop it. But if you're hesitant to do that, it can be bigger and bigger and bigger very quickly.
It's one of those interesting things that's like we just haven't had to deal with that, you know, in the sense of that like none of us are trying to make D&D that, right? So even to like have to worry, it's just definitely like it's a very specific set of like it's for some people, you know, it's for some tables.
I actually did have to deal with this once. Now I'm thinking about it.
Oh yeah.
But it wasn't so bad. This is like the best way to have to deal with it.
Okay.
Oh man.
Excited.
So I had one player who's a really great guy, good friend of mine, really sweet fellow, but he is also just like a little bit of a loner, and I don't think he likes that he's a little bit of a loner, but he's one of those people that like sometimes like has a lot going on that's like making it hard for him to socialize, but then actively like doesn't work towards changing or fixing them, and then sort of wallows in it. But it leads to him spiraling sometimes. But regardless of that, in D&D, his character, this was not my first session, but my first campaign that I ran. At one point, his character had like a playfully, like he was a bird person, and they saved some lizard people from some snake people. And we kind of had like a joking thing where like the matron of the lizard people like was a little flirty with him or whatever, just sort of playfully, but it wasn't like anything serious or whatever. Like we sat in the moment for a second or two, and then he kept like trying to be flirty with her the next session, and I basically said to him, if you want to have your character be romantic with another character, that's fine, but I am not going to role play it because that feels uncomfortable for me, because I don't want to role play a lady lizard person flirting with you. That makes me feel uncomfortable. So
valid.
So he kind of like made reference to it in character from time to time, but I put a hard stop on it when it was like pushing too far. And I didn't do that in the session. There was one session where I felt awkward the whole session because I didn't want to bring it up in the middle of a session because he would have been embarrassed. So I just talked about it afterwards. But that was the time where I was like, but what was weird about it was that like, and even afterwards, like that was one of his favorite parts of the games. But it was like, dude, I just like, there's an element of like you are lonely in real life, and I appreciate that you are having a hard time not being in a relationship right now. Like it is hard to not be in a relationship.
But please stop projecting.
Like
on
I get
my
it,
game.
but
like,
not here.
And it's also there's so many reasons why it's not my job to fix that issue in my D&D game.
Yeah. No, that is so not your job, and that is so not the place either.
So that was awkward, but that was the only time that I really had to deal with that. I do have one player who is Albanian, and he is like very Albanian, and he will sometimes make jokes that like are really awkward. But I have to remind myself that he is like not from America and has like an 80s sense of humor because he's from Albania.
So
he's
all
just,
mixes.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to like every now and then I'll be like, that's crossed the line a little bit, and he's
It was
really
like, no,
apologetic.
that's
He's almost always like, I do not understand, but I feel bad about it. It's like,
Oh, and you're like, no, we're just letting you know. We're just telling you to learn.
Poor guy.
no, he's a sweetie. He's actually really good. He's really good about it. He's the kind of guy that like, once you let him know where the line is, he's really respectful of it. But his sense of where the line is has like a third world Eastern European vibe to it. So he has a very dark sense of humor and a very vague line.
Oh man, alive.
What a
What a
mix.
combination.
What a mix. Hey,
He's a sweetie, though.
it's one of those things where it's like you can make mistakes, but as long as you don't make the same mistake twice, we're good. You know, like that's fine. You know, here's the line. Don't cross it again.
Make
That's
a
all we
mistake,
need.
Just don't be a repeat offender.
Exactly,
please.
exactly.
My dears, I think I have to go because I need to. I'm nannying for my wee little nephew tomorrow morning.
Aw, how nice.
Gotta get up. Gotta
That's
get up
so
super early.
sweet.
Yeah, it'll be sweet. I haven't seen him in like 2 weeks, so I'm really excited to see him.
Aw, great.
Since camping, right?
Yeah, he got sick, and then
Oh,
his
no.
whole house
Poor little
their
munchkin.
their whole house got COVID, so we had to.
Oh no.
Yeah, really.
They're fine now, but
That's
boy.
good. I'm glad.
But yeah, so I'm gonna see him tomorrow.
That's
But anyway, before I go, I just want to say, Ori, Mars, you are wonderful. I love you guys. You're great. Let's hang out again soon.
Always a pleasure.
And yeah, don't be
Absolutely.
strangers. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Ta-ta.
All right.
Alrighty.
Yeah, he can't sneak up on us now with his new avatar
And no.
ping, essentially. Very nice, very awesome.
Oh,
But
amazing. His cover's been blown.
yes. So,
But yeah, it was interesting.
Congratulations,
when
Dorky
asked about
David.
Time skips. Nice, Dorky David. Oh, congrats.
exactly, no more jump scare.
Yes. But no, it was interesting mentioning time skips because in a sense it is accurate that you do destroy consistency, but it depends on what you're trying to do with it. Like I said, if you're just doing it to move the plot along, like to skip to the quote unquote fun and interesting stuff, that's not really going to ruin your internal consistency.
I have
you just,
two
you
things.
just kind of got to remember where you left off. But I would say if you're doing a time skip to purposefully shake up the status quo, like Star Wars did, for example, like Luke went from optimistic hero of the story to pessimistic hermit, like, yeah, that is messing with consistency. You have thrown everything established pretty much out the window, but you've done it purposefully. Whether it pays off on the long run really comes down to how you tell your story.
What I think I have two things. Yeah.
Oh, David.
Well,
that got me. That got me.
I mean, it's a vibe. I can very much understand the vibe, but maybe you could be a good influence, huh? That's
Absolutely.
that's the
the
hope.
whole role of an aunt and uncle. Just
But,
be an awesome influence, and presents are important too.
I have two issues that can arise from a badly done time skip. And it's specifically two issues with how the time skip works in the first place, right? First issue is when something happens that causes the main cast to remain stagnant while the world moves on ahead. And this happened in Fairy Tail. This is my big example. In Fairy Tail, I think it's
That
season
is always
6.
your go-to.
Because it's like a really big thing. I think it's season 6. They end up going to an island. Lots of lore shit happens. The island sinks, and it was like led up to that. But the island sinks, and it puts the whole main cast in essentially a 7-year stasis, while the world around them progresses, so that when they come back, they're kind of like, a lot of shit is new, everybody thought they were dead, and now they have more people to fight, is essentially the vibe. Okay, so it's like the characters didn't progress at all. It's not like there was a lull compared to what else was happening. Like we go right
No,
into
the
tournament
authors
arc,
literally just pushed a pause
but it was
button,
literally like we
but
had
only on the characters, not the world.
yeah, we just had like, you know, it literally felt like we didn't have it. So no, essentially what happened is that
So the way that makes me think is that, and I'm not trying to like say this was the author's intention. I can
know what
only
the intention is.
speculate.
I can tell you what the intention is.
But the only thing I can figure from that, or at least my theory, is that the characters remain the same because those are the characters we've grown to know and love. Those are the personalities we've grown to know and love. But the world changes. This allows them to essentially have a reboot of sorts where they get reintroduced to the world. They now get to react to all the new interesting things around them, but they keep the same personality that we've grown accustomed to. So we get to see how that interacts off all these new experiences. Which is why I kind of refer to it as a reboot of sorts.
I think a large issue, I think a large reason that they did what they did has to do with essentially power creep equivalent, in the sense of that, for those who don't know, okay, Fairy Tail's a very long show, but main character Natsu
notorious for power
is
creep.
a Dragon Slayer mage. So he specifically has dragon magic, which means he was specifically taught by an actual dragon, which are now extinct, to do this magic. There are very few of these, as there were very few dragons, and each dragon only like taught one of them. So he's like a fire dragon, Dragon Slayer mage. Throughout the first 5 seasons, he gets introduced to various other Dragon Slayer mages of different dragons, and they sort of have either rivals to bros moments, or like we have to take care of her because she's younger, and all these sort of stuff. And so we find these, but again, the whole time they're like touting that these are very rare mages, right? Like this is not a common thing to be at all, and him finding these 2 other ones is like wild. Then they're like all out of them, right? Like if you keep showing up more, like are they really that rare? You know, who knows? And then on top of that, no one can be, there's no one who can newly become a Dragon Slayer mage, right? Because the dragons don't exist anymore. So there's no more dragons to teach more mages this magic.
So now you basically written yourself into a corner.
So what happens is that they go to stasis for 7 years, they come back. So that's 7 years of growth for someone who was, you know, let's say 10, 12 to become 17, 19, you know, in age. Be around Natsu's age, right? What they did is they had 2 children that supposedly existed the whole time that were like 2nd generation Dragon Slayer mages that were made with like science or whatever. And they're the top dogs because Natsu's gone, and Natsu's top dog, right? So they're the top dogs because everybody thinks Natsu's dead, and he comes back in this tournament arc, and the whole point of the tournament arc is for him to fight these 2 and be friends with them again. And honestly, really cool character designs, really interesting shit. But like that is the point of the time skip. Like I'm not joking. Like to introduce these 2 characters, to have them be younger and not around originally, there's no doubt in my mind that is, yes, that is the point of that weird time skip thing. So that's one. I don't like that. The second thing is a small qualm I have with the time skip in The Dragon Prince that just happened. And
I know that's a big point of contention for you.
It's honestly a very small thing.
Put very important material in a comic.
I think so. Yeah. So I think they did a good job, except for one specific thing that I don't enjoy how they handled, and that very specific thing, honestly, it's not really spoilers. Like they talk about it pretty soon, so I'm gonna. If you really don't want to hear spoilers, I'll give you 5 seconds to tune out now. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you haven't muted, I'm gonna talk about it.
You're so gracious.
in the start of it, we see just Callum and Ezran and everything, and they're in Catullus, and we see Soren, and we see Corvus, and everybody, and they're having a good time. And, but there's no Rayla. And if we remember to the season before, like, emotional moment and this whole thing. What turns, and there's nothing said about it, there's nothing said, like, Callum seems fine, until a moment where suddenly not suddenly, but suddenly it's like he's very sad about the Rayla thing, and we're like, what the fuck is the Rayla thing? Like, what happened? And not until, and then Rayla comes back, and apparently he hadn't seen her for the 2 years which the time skip took place in. He hadn't seen her at all. She comes back and she's like, like, can't it be like before? And he's rightfully upset. Because what turns out to have happened that we don't find out until much later, after a lot of this character interaction of Callum being justifiably really pissed off at Rayla for doing what she did, turns out that she, after the events of season 3, that she was like, Callum, we can't be together. I need to go and make sure that Viren is actually dead. And I will spend 2 years not talking to you or doing anything with this or doing anything about this because this is my life, journey, whatever, and just leaves. Like, honestly, like, barely even tells him anything is what it sort of, like, the vibe is. And she just leaves. And, yeah, exactly, literally ghosted. And he just doesn't hear from her for 2 years at all. Like, never returns. And then she suddenly comes back and she just wants everything to be the same. Now, Dorky David, I understand her reasoning, right? Viren killed her parents, Viren killed her surrogate dad, like, Viren killed everybody else. like, Viren is a problem, okay? I understand wanting him to be dead. I still, however, don't think that Callum is in the wrong for being upset with somebody who spent 2 years not talking with him, not even sending letter if he knew that she was dead or alive, or anything, and waltzes back into his life and wants everything to be exactly how it was 2 years ago. Right? Like I think he's justified for being, like, not wanting to just be an open book or talk that. Like, he warms up relatively quickly, right? But I definitely don't think that, like, he's in the wrong for, like, having this very, like, a heartfelt moment, and she just leaves, and he doesn't know about anything. So that's sort of like it is.
Oh boy.
We'll tell Oscar.
That sounds like an absolute mess.
So everything else about the time skip, fine. That part, couldn't we have had, like, flashback, like, 5 minutes of something?
A flashback or some kind of setup.
Like I don't know.
Even an episode focused on it.
Yeah, I understand not wanting it to be a whole episode. I understand that, like we said, time constraints. Honestly, it was a shorter season, and all that sort of stuff. I think friends are a different thing, Dorky David. I think in the sense of, because I think about it, if Dylan, like, walked out of my life because somebody killed his parents and he had to go kill them, and I don't hear from him, like, understandable, right? I can understand being that upset. Like, I can get that. However, for whatever reason, I have to stay here. But then never calling me, never writing me a letter, never telling me that he's, like, alive or something for 2 years, dead. And then coming back, and I've been 2 years living my life, and like a very important sort of, like, developmental part of my life where he's become the court mage and everything is like, yeah, it's not gonna be the same if he just wants to be like, yes, and we're back to being exactly the same. It's like, you changed in 2 years, man. That's all,
That's just not how it works.
There's definitely a difference with friends, because, like, Mars and I had rather large gaps and everything and talking about that, but there's not that, like, level of, like, intimacy that somebody when you, like, spend that sort of time with them and everything like that. So, I do feel like it is a little different.
And we also gotta remember, like, there's definitely a difference between real life and a show meant for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, real life, I think it's easier to pick up because it's like, hey, we're all adults. We get busy at times. Sometimes hangouts just don't happen, but we hang out where we can.
Yeah.
And if it happens to be a year later, like, that's just kind of what happens. That's what happened to me and a lot of my undergrad friends, especially. But I feel like in TV land, in this realm of entertainment and satisfying stories, nobody wants to see realistic. We want answers. We want to know, why wasn't this character around? Why are they acting like this this big deal thing is not a big deal? And I think it leads to a very dissatisfying experience for the viewer, like you said.
I think it more comes to the lines of like when you're in a romantic relationship with somebody, right? Or even like a very deep friendship where like you expect to talk with them relatively frequently. Like Mars, like right, like I talk with you,
soulmates.
you know, I talk with you 5 times a week, 4 times a week, a lot, okay? And if suddenly you were like just gone, that would be rough.
Jarring.
That would be jarring. Versus like, let's say like, you know, it's not like I talk to Ivan very much, right? Like let's say if suddenly I didn't hear from Ivan, you know, for a year, it probably wouldn't hit me so hard, right? So, you know, I think there's a difference there. And that's why it's like when, you know, in a romantic relationship, you are talking to that person all the time, right? Like you know, Dylan and I call like almost every day, and like, you know, I see him and all this sort of stuff. And if he suddenly just stopped doing that with no explanation and no like understanding of like where he is or what he's doing, like that would be weird for him to come back 2 years later and just be like, yeah, let's pick up where we left off. Like it'd be awkward.
It's like, no, I need an explanation first, please.
You know, it's the up and disappearing sort of thing. But all right, let's tell Oscar that we're done with spoilers.
All right, Oscar, you're free to listen again. Spoilers have ended.
Yes. Okay, so Mars.
That's an interesting time skip that both moved the world along, tried to move the characters along.
It did everything
like
else great except that one thing.
Way back to the status quo toward the end.
Yeah, it kind of did.
Like, what was the point of having those two break up if they were gonna come back together anyway?
But yeah. No.
It's like, okay, great. She's going off on her own to make sure this guy is dead.
But Mars.
Why even bother to explain it if they're just going to come back?
What you should do now is finally tell chat about our blunder and how we fixed it.
Yes.
Because we don't have Cinder.
That's true. So we have talked about consistency in the context of dialogue, storytelling, world building, time skips. We've talked about it in pretty much every sense you can imagine. What I have not told you guys about yet is consistency in the actual written
plot
word.
points.
Well, I was going to talk about the other one. Which one were you thinking of? I was going to talk about grammar consistency.
Oh, I was talking about the intruder.
Oh, okay. Well, if you want to share that one after this
Okay,
one.
that's fine. Go ahead.
That way we both get some time to talk. But yes, so not only do you want to make sure what your characters are saying is consistent with personality and everything, but you also want to make sure, like, let's say, for example, you have an accent or a dialect you're using. We have a lot that we're juggling with our characters, particularly with Milano and Ferrex. They typically leave off endings of words, and that kind of gives them a little bit of this piratey, I kind of do what I want vibe. So that's why we decided to choose that. In previous iterations of the script, I had written that Milano says the word here, like come here, over here, without the H.
Come here.
So when you
read
it would be like, come here. get over here, like that. What I quickly realized, especially when paired with his other dialectual tics, is that it's very awkward to read. Your mind does not easily read all of those tics in one smooth go. So I had to make some compromises with that. I had to decide, okay, we'll leave the endings off of these words, but we're going to have him say initial word position H when it comes to here. Oh, look at me bringing in my speech language pathology stuff. Nice.
Use it.
I knew it would come in handy.
Use it. It was a Jeopardy answer
now
today.
That we made that choice, yes, Atathis, that's exactly it. That's what I originally had. Now imagine that with a whole bunch of turn-ins, look-ins, go-ins. Rita, like, it's a lot. And we didn't want to do that to our poor audience. But now we had the problem of we need to go back and find every instance of
that
here without the H and correct it to here with the H. Because we gotta keep consistency. Here is the ting. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Here is the ting. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And we do have duh. I believe Ferrix, if
I
I
think
remember
Ferrix
correctly,
says duh, yeah.
duh.
Ferrix uses
yeah,
duh.
Ferrix is very exaggerated.
Ferrix is incredibly exaggerated.
Fun thing about Ferrix's extremely exaggerated dialogue is that, or dialect, I mean, is that his is more of a performance than his true personality. Like, Milano is just speaking how he's speaking, but Ferrix is putting on a show when he talks like that, because he looks up to Milano, and he wants to be on his level. But when we get into, like, the drama bits with Ferrix, when we get into the more serious stuff, the dialect disappears completely. And you see a little bit more of the true Ferrix come out because he's not saying duh. He's actually using verb tense and verb endings and things like that. So it's interesting how you can use dialogue to convey when, I keep saying dialogue, I keep meaning to say dialect. You can use it to convey when a character is serious and when they're kind of having a good time, or maybe they're putting on a front that they don't want people to see through. I found it a really fun thing to play with.
I think it's really interesting.
The medium forms give you a chance to do that.
And I think it's very also interesting, you see it in how Aster's dialogue will go, right? He is a very sort of not talkative person. He's very blunt and short. So when he talks a lot, that's sort of like something's going on.
It's like, ooh, that's noticeable because he is very stoic. He is very, I only need 5 words to get across my point. I don't talk very much. So when he does go into a long speech, it's like, oh, okay, something's up.
Exactly.
I think he means business.
So the consistency I was talking about,
or he can point out our other blunder,
was so at the very beginning of Outcast's sort of genesis, it was much more of a comedy, as much as just lighthearted, funny sort of thing that ended up spiraling into this like kind of deep epic sort of vibe epic thing, and what was particularly interesting about that was the plot point that we had made at the very beginning of the sort of the comic. The whole sort of what is happening in this whole bit right here that I'm redoing. And there's like a lot of context with that, but then we needed is it a spoiler? Should I say it or not?
I don't think it's a super spoiler.
Okay, so essentially, there's an intruder on the island where Hotsun is stayed, and it's not Hotsun. And so Milano and Hotsun and Milano's crew are trying to find out who it is and find them, right? Because this is Milano's island. He doesn't want random trespassers sort of, running around unchecked. And they're having issues finding him, right? They can't find this intruder. But we needed for this story that we're trying to tell at this point to move off the island. And so we had that all planned out, but Mars sort of had a moment, an epiphany of like, wait, we didn't resolve the intruder thing. Milano wouldn't just leave an intruder on the island alone now that he knows that they're there, right? With all these reactions that we had before. So we had to figure out, okay, how do we get the pirates to leave the island without sort of, you know, needing to fully deal with this unresolved thing and not just like leave it and forget about it, right? Because at that moment we had just forgotten about it.
It's not going to be resolved for a good while.
But that's important to the story.
But we did need to move the story off the island because there's a reason they're going in this direction. There's a reason they're leaving for a brief like supply run. Essentially.
So if anything, it was a brief character inconsistency that Milano would be willing to just, and Ferrex, just up and leave the island with this intruder thing unresolved.
Yeah. So we had to come up with a solution to that, because now it was like, well, if we don't come up with this, we cannot have them leave this island. We just can't. It would be inconsistent with what their character has been. Up until this point in every entry, they've been very adamant about finding this intruder. At least 3 entries are all about Hotson. How can you help us find the intruder? Mm-hmm. So for us to just drop that plot point and be like, let's go somewhere else, it would be incredibly jarring.
Yeah, and not a good idea.
So we had to work out a resolution for that. There was also another, I think I could go into this without too much spoiler. Most of the callers are people who have left their home life behind.
For one reason or another.
Exactly. And Ferrex is one of them. Now his character trait is he doesn't really run from challenges. He doesn't face them head on, so to speak. But he definitely
won't back down.
At his problems first, thinks about them later, you know? I'd say that's the best way to describe him. Screams at problems first, thinks about them later, is the vibe. So I realized at that point, writing Ferrex's backstory, that it would be out of character for him to run away, because that's just not who he is. Now, we had a couple of solutions to solve that. We could either have it be a moment of weakness for him, and then he resolves, I'm never going to run away from anything ever again, and maybe that's the start of that character trait. But it didn't really fit in with other elements that we had previously established as well, because we do have a plot point in his childhood where he's not running away, he's fighting back, so that would also be inconsistent, because we've established he's a fighter, he's going to stand up for himself. Eventually, we were able to fine-tune it to a point where it made sense that he would run away and leave everything behind, thinking that this was the best logical decision in his mind, through his own reasoning. I can't go into too much, unfortunately, so I'm sorry it sounds so vague. But there is a very interpersonal reason that he chooses to run away that made sense with the story we had concocted, with the family we had given him, and with the traits he had been established with. So luckily it all worked out in the end, but it was definitely a hoop that we kind of had to jump through unexpectedly, because the whole idea of running away to be a pirate it did not fit in with his personality. Ferrex does not run away from challenges. So we had to re-examine his backstory and determine what we were doing with that.
And so that's another point of consistency, right? Character consistency.
Absolutely, which is what we started this whole discussion with.
Yeah.
So it came full circle.
There's lots of different consistencies to take in, and certain stories will have more of it, than others, right?
Oh, absolutely. Slice of Life definitely abides more by character-driven consistency than actual plot consistency, I've noticed.
Just lore in general, right? Like, you don't need Dorky David's, 80 pages on how the magic system works because, they don't have that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that sort of thing. It doesn't really matter.
It comes down to the genre you're telling within
The genre
as well.
and what you're doing, right? Like, I think at least early Adventure Time, right, didn't have a lot of consistency. That was kind of the point, though. But they set that up for you right away.
It did set up expectations. This
Exactly.
is a world where weird things happen, candy can talk, there's a human named Finn, there's a dog named Jake, and they rescue a princess called Bubblegum. That is your plot. For season 1 through 3, I believe, that is your plot. And you could argue that's a form of consistency as well. They could throw whatever weird
but you would just accept it.
Story at you that they had in store.
25.
But as long as the characters remain consistent, we were willing to go along for the ride. And clearly it shows.
Yeah. It's just a jolly romp,
Exactly.
But, so yeah.
25 is still very impressive, David.
Yeah, it definitely is. It was a large number. It's a larger number than anything I have ever done. So. But, any closing thought, Mars, before we sort of wrap up here?
Closing thoughts. I would just say keep those notes. Make sure you have them on standby. Anything you think might come back later, or anything you think you may potentially forget later down the line. If you don't have a second person to remind you, no, we established this before. Even if you do have that, have those notes. Trust me, it helps. It's a lifesaver. And it can also just be nice to see, because eventually once you have all these notes together to show this thread of logic you've created, you have essentially a timeline of how this plot point has grown within your story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Atathis, it's interesting you mentioned plot holes, and that could be a whole story, that could be a whole topic for another day. I do think plot holes are different from inconsistencies. Inconsistencies are logic set up within your story that are ignored at certain points. So like Ori and Cinder said earlier, Legend of Korra, and I think David said too, Legend of Korra is a great example for that, because we have bending established, we have lightning bending established as this really hard thing to do, and suddenly in the second series with Legend of Korra, suddenly everyone can do it. That to me is a plot inconsistency. A plot hole is
in the Mummy.
Obvious. Well, I was going to give a definition first.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
But I would say a plot hole is closer to, here's an issue within the story that no logic is ever brought in to address. And that's the difference. Consistency relies on logic, so it makes sense that inconsistency would be a breakdown of that logic or an ignoring of that logic. Whereas a plot hole is just, the logic was never there to begin with, is how I would describe it.
And my example is how in The Mummy there is a...
You've been waiting for
this. Just loved because it just happened. In The Mummy, they have this whole thing set up that the evil mummy dude is terrified of cats, won't come near cats, but everybody in the story is too stupid to let the guy who needs to not be murdered have a cat papoose. That's a plot hole.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's like, that might fall more into inconsistency because the logic was brought up but then never addressed again.
What is a plot hole?
There is a lot of crossover between
There's definitely crossover.
Consistencies. There is a lot of crossover. Honestly, the details come down to nitpicking
Plot
at
holes,
this point.
plot holes are also very much the vibe of step 1, steal everybody's underwear. Step 2,
Step 2,
step 3,
step 3,
profit.
Profit.
All right,
I
that's
love
a
that
plot
one.
hole. That's
That
a
is
plot
plot
hole.
hole.
Step
Yes,
2 is that's
yes.
a plot hole.
A plot hole is when you underpants gnome it.
Exactly. My wrapping statement
I love it.
is reread, review, review. And if you have references for your characters in art, don't be afraid to use them. And if you don't, you should make them.
Okay, so reread, review, and reference.
Yeah,
We got the three
the
R's.
3 R's. The
Remember,
9
guys.
R's.
Err.
Yeah, like a pirate. Alrighty. Yeah, so with that, I'll be signing off, guys. Join us
Thank you for
tomorrow.
joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you. Always a pleasure. Join us tomorrow for Ace Attorney, and where we will indeed, I know from a reputable source, that we will have more crime or no crime, and it will be a lot fancier, if I don't say so myself.
It's
So
official, you guys, and it looks amazing.
it's very, very
I'm so
fun stuff.
excited.
So, yeah, make sure to tune in for that. Make sure you get your points. The more you get right,
Yes,
all that
this
sort of
is
stuff.
Another chance to earn points.
Another chance to earn
so
points outside of just
all you need to
existing
come.
in chat, which we do also appreciate. But with that, yeah, hope to see you all tomorrow. Thanks for joining us.
See you guys then.
Good night.